again. And so yeah, the way that I'm going to open up the developer tools, there's a few different ways to do it. One, there's a little tiny like hamburger 3-dot menu in Chrome over here. And if I click on that and go to more tools and then go to developer tools, it's going to open up this little sidebar. And if you haven't opened it before, it'll probably be on this tab, the Elements tab. And that's where you can see all the HTML. So you can see as I'm hovering over this stuff, you can actually see the content of my little presentation. You can see the menu and the content, and here's all the different slides and da da da. So you've probably seen that before if you've taken MMP 100 or 200 or 240 or something like that. We won't really be using the Elements panel as much. We'll be using the console panel a lot more. And so another way that you can open this, I'm on a Mac, you guys might be on a PC or something else. But if you're on a Mac and you go to, let's see, View at the top toolbar, oh, you can't see this because I'm just streaming the browser. Okay, so, but if you can just listen. If you're on a Mac, you can go to View in the top toolbar on the computer, and there's a developer area there, and you can go to developer tools. Um, so that's another way to do it. A really fast way to do it, if you're on a Mac, is just to hold Command and Alt or Option at the same time and hit J. And J is the one that opens up the JavaScript console. And you can close it by doing the same thing. If you are on a PC, you can do that by using Control Shift J. Yeah, that'll do the same thing that Command Alt J does on a Mac. So any way that you want to do it, what you want to do is get that little console open, and we're going to use that as a way to kind of show some examples of what we're talking about when it comes to JavaScript. Um, so now we're not there quite yet, so I'll let you know when I want you to type some stuff in there and see what happens. But for now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about JavaScript and kind of the basics, and we'll do a couple little demonstrations. And again, I'm going to be looking, I only have one monitor, so I'll be looking at the browser as I'm talking. But if you have questions and you want to do something in the chat, I'll hear the notification, or if you just talk, I'll hear it. So if you have any questions while we're going, just let me know. Okay, so we're talking about JavaScript. And just to get started, the contrast on this is not great. Let's try to see if we can get a different color. There we go. Okay. So JavaScript is a programming language. It was created in 1995. So it's, old, sort of, but it's younger than I am, for instance, and might be younger than some of you guys. Um, but it was created in 1995 to work specifically with websites. So web pages built on HTML and CSS. So that should be a little bit familiar if you've definitely taken MMP 100 before if you're in this class. So you've created a website before and you know that HTML is used to create the structure of a website and CSS is used to create the style, things like the color and the font of a website. And so early websites had just HTML and CSS, and that was enough to create content and to create links and make sites that looked cool and add media and things like that. But it wasn't enough to make rich applications with moving parts and sophisticated animations and interaction. And so that's why JavaScript was created to kind of make websites behave more like applications on our computers. So you can make things like video games or use sound or do all sorts of different things that we're pretty used to doing on the web these days. So those are kind of the three basic technologies that all websites are built with: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about JavaScript as a language because it's honestly, it is interesting, but it's not super relevant to what we're doing in the class. But if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I have a couple links here. What is JavaScript on MDN? This goes into a lot of detail. MDN is the Mozilla Developer Network, which has a lot of documentation and examples of different things relating to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and building a website in general. And Mozilla is where JavaScript was first developed. So they really are the authority on the language. So this is kind of a good sort of article to look at to get a sense of how JavaScript works and what the basics are. If you're really nerdy and you want to really, learn a lot, really recommend these videos of Douglas Crockford, who, to wait for this ad. Um, we're not going to watch a lot of this, but I'll just kind of show you where it starts. Where's the little? Okay, so that's Douglas Crockford, and in this video, this is actually the second chapter of this really long lecture series, and it's an hour and a half. So this is if you like really want to get really deep into it. But yeah, he's one of the original architects of the language, and it is really honestly a fascinating history of like how JavaScript was created, why it was created, and everything that went into it and how it's developed over time. So if you're interested in that stuff, that's what I recommend. But as I said, it's not super relevant to what we're actually learning in the class, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Um, Okay, so one thing that you will learn if you watch that video that I want everybody to know is that Java and JavaScript are two different languages, and they're really not actually related to each other in any way. And this is maybe not the most important thing to make sure everybody knows, but when you are if you're ever looking for a job as a developer or talking about what your skills are, you will look very silly if you do not know that Java and JavaScript are two different things. So that's something that is, I hear a lot of students saying that they know Java when they mean JavaScript and vice versa. So we just want to make sure and clear that up really quickly. JavaScript was named Java. It has Java in the name because they wanted to Java was a really popular language at the time. And it's still a very popular language, but at that time in particular, it was like a really exciting new popular language. And so they're basically just calling it that in order to get people to think that that's what it was, so that it would have higher adoption rates with browsers and other vendors. So they sound the same, but they are not similar. They don't have really anything in common. They're both object-oriented programming languages, and there's some other similarities that you might say about them, but the main thing to know is that they are two different languages that have the same name for historical reasons having nothing to do with actual code or technical similarity. So maybe not the most important thing, but something to know up at the front. Okay, so now let's talk about what JavaScript really is. It's a scripting language. It's built into all web browsers, so that means it runs on every computer pretty much in the world, and it runs out of the box. You don't have to compile it. You don't have to know what computer it's being run on. For the most part, you have to know some things, but it's a very flexible language in that way. So it adds functionality to different websites. It can interact with the HTML content and the CSS styles of a website to create interactions and animation. And these days, it's become a much more popular language for building applications and lots of other important things in software development and multimedia and all sorts of other stuff. So it's become like an incredibly popular language. It's probably the most popular language. I think I haven't looked at there's like surveys they do about this, and I haven't looked at it like recently, but it often is listed as the most popular language for job listings and resumes and stuff like that. So it's a great language to get started on, and it's a great language to use, and it's very useful if you're interested in programming on a career level at all. It's a good skill to have. Um, so yeah, yeah. Um, oh, did I? Let me put a link to this in the chat. I forgot to do that. So yeah, you can click on that link, and then you can you probably just will look in the outline view. You'll see the same content. It'll just look a little bit different. This is like where I am now. But yeah, either way. Yeah. Okay. So a couple terms to look at as we get into it. The term static and dynamic. And so static, you've probably heard these terms before. You might have a sense of what they mean. But in terms of what we're going to talk about with web development, it's an important difference. So static means that the thing stays the same. It doesn't change over time. So static content is HTML things like an image or a piece of text that is always going to be the same thing regardless of what happens on the website. Dynamic content is something that changes over time. So something like an animation or a game. There's content on the screen, but it changes based on time and it changes based on inputs from the viewer. Yeah, what JavaScript does is it adds dynamic content or the possibility of dynamic content on the website. So now we're at the JavaScript console and we're going to see a little bit of what JavaScript does. So if you haven't done it already, you should have Chrome open. And if you're on a Mac, you should hit, let's look at those key commands. If you're on a Mac, you should hit Command, Alt, or Option, and J, and that will toggle open your console. If you're on Windows, you should hit Control Shift J, and that will do the same thing. And when you do that, what you'll see is basically just this big blank space and there's a little blue arrow. I'm using Command plus to increase the zoom on my browser just to make it easier for you guys to see, but you don't need to do that on your computer, or you can if you want to. But in this console, I can type stuff and you'll see some different things come up, and that's where I can write code. So that's not where we're always going to write code, but it is a really useful tool with JavaScript is that we can actually test our code in the browser while we're running our website. And so we can test different things and see how things work. And for now, I'm just using it to basically show some really simple basics of how JavaScript works. So have your console open, and I actually want you to type out the things that I'm typing out. So, that way, obviously, nothing different is going to happen on your computer than happens on mine, but you'll start to get the feel of what it means to actually write code, especially if you haven't written any code in MMP 100 or you haven't really used a text editor before. Writing code is a very different sort of physical and technical process than making something in Photoshop or drawing on a piece of paper. So when you kind of get started writing code, it's good to practice typing and getting used to using a text editor or a console or the other things that we use to create a program. So have your console open. You can click on here to type something, and then you can click back on the browser to change what's happening in the browser. So you have to kind of move back and forth. And you've probably done this before with the elements, with the web elements, looking at HTML and CSS. But these tools are really, really important for any web developer to be like very familiar with. I use them constantly. Like when I'm working on a project or writing code, my console is always open. I like barely ever close it. I mean, if I'm just using a website just, to do like reading or shopping or something like that, I won't have it open. But if I'm doing something that's either a coding project or an art project, I always have that console open so I can see what's happening or test different things. And so we're going to get started just writing a really, really simple expression into the console. So you can see on here, it's the simplest expression. Well, maybe not the simplest, but it's a very simple expression that we can do with code. I'm just going to write 2 plus 2, and we'll see they're already kind of telling me what it's going to be. But once I do that, if I hit enter, so I just hit the enter key on my keyboard, now we have evaluated that statement. Okay, so that's a very simple statement in code, which is just 2 plus 2. And JavaScript, one of the things it can do is basic math. And so it just added 2 and 2 together, and it gave me the response 4. So it's not really a program. It doesn't really do anything, but we're just going to start getting used to what code looks like and what we can do with it. So yeah, try that. Just type in 2 plus 2 into your console and hit enter, and you should see that 4 come out. If something if that doesn't happen and you're not sure why, let me know and we can take a look. Yeah. Okay. Are you on a different website or are you on the on my slides website? Oh, you're on Discord. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's normal. So that's actually interesting. So a lot of times, like if I go to a tab with Discord and open up the console, you probably see something like, sorry. Okay. So that probably looks kind of alarming. Sorry, I kind of was very loud on the mic for a second. So yeah, that's pretty funny. Actually, I've never seen that before. They're basically saying like, I think I think Discord in particular has had a lot of issues with like crypto scams and stuff like that. So they're probably just basically warning people that if like some person on Discord is telling you to do something, there is like you could like write a script that would like steal somebody's like information or something like that. Um, yeah, so it says if someone told you to copy paste something here, you have an 11 out of 10 chance you're being scammed. That's pretty funny actually. It's good. It's a good thing for them to have in there. But you can still use the console. You can. There's a little button here at the top that looks like a kind of like no sign or a stop sign, and if you click that, it'll clear everything out, and then you can still just do 2 plus 2, and you'll see 4. So yeah, I won't give you any malicious scripts to run on the Discord site. Um, yeah, so different sites will you'll see different stuff in the console on different websites. Like if we go to BMCC, they probably won't have anything in there. Yeah, so they don't really have anything in there. Blackboard, they probably have like a bunch of weird stuff. No, actually, they don't have anything in there. But those are just messages that the developer uses to, say stuff to probably mostly in most cases like other developers, but like that's something you'll get used to it as you look at it more and more. Like sometimes if I'm on like if I'm trying to watch something on like Netflix or something and it's not working, you can actually open the console and sometimes you'll see like error messages and I mean, it's not, you can't really usually do anything about them, but you can at least see that like there is an error going on. It's not just like, not doing anything. But yeah, so you will see different stuff in the console depending on what website you're on. But most of the time you might see some like warnings or something like that, but you won't see too much stuff in there. Yeah, no. So that's a good question, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But yeah, it doesn't affect the website. So actually, what I'll show you guys in a second, but we'll skip ahead real quick. So one of the things I can do with JavaScript is I can actually manipulate the content and style of the website. So if I want to do something like document.body dot style dot background color, and if I set it to like green. See, I just made my website's background green. But the important thing to know is that that's not a permanent change. I'm changing the code that's being, shown to me right now. But when I get a website, it's actually going to like a server or another computer somewhere and grabbing the information and bringing it back to my computer. And I can't change anything that's on that server, at least not through the console. So when I refresh this page, it goes back to blue. So I can make changes on my computer, but I can't make changes to the original website. So that's actually a good thing to be aware of. Uh, Uh, I feel like I shouldn't be responding to this, but yeah, technically you could. Mhm. Yes. I mean, like if you wanted to, like people do this all the time. Like if I go to like Twitter, although maybe I shouldn't open Twitter, who knows what you're gonna see on there. Let's go to, yeah, I could just like go to the BMCC website and I could be like, let's say I don't want to have class on like an extra day. This is actually not JavaScript. This is like just going in here. I could like edit this and change this to like September 3rd through 6th, and it'll look like that for a second, and I could show that to somebody. That's actually a scam that people do. If you watch those YouTube videos where people are catching scammers, a lot of the scams that they do is they get you to open your bank website and then they do something like that to change the numbers to make you think that like something happened. But it's just a it's just a scam. So you can see it's changed to 6 on here, but as soon as I refresh this page, it goes back to 5. So it's not a permanent change, but yeah, you could take a screenshot or show it to somebody and you might be able to trick them. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I could honestly do it either way. HTML, it was a little bit faster because I knew I could find it easily, but I could use JavaScript to change the text of that page as well. Um, it's they all talk to each other. But if you're trying to change the content, it's easier to just to go straight to the HTML. It's actually technically it's easier to change the CSS if I click on the body and go to the background color here. This would be easier than writing code. I can just change the background here. But they all talk to each other. So since we're learning JavaScript, I'm doing the examples in JavaScript. Yeah, good question. Okay, let's try to keep going, but these are good questions. Keep going if you have more questions. So yeah, real quick, coming back to the console. So usually the console is used for debugging. We'll do a lesson where we learn how to do this. But what that means is basically when you're working on a project, sometimes it doesn't work right and it's hard to figure out why. And the console is usually the main tool that you use to kind of help figure out what's going on. So we'll learn how to do that in a couple of weeks. Um, and okay, so the last little bit of this is just going over some basic terminology in JavaScript. Um, we might not get through all of it, but we'll just keep going in the next class. So expressions. This is a big word that just means like a thing. Like when I say expression, what I mean is like a line of code essentially. And an expression, like in code, we're usually expressing something. So if I write 2 plus 2, I'm kind of like expressing the idea of adding 2 and 2 together. So I'll refer to that as an expression. It's kind of a vague term, but it's an important one to know because that's what if you're in a coding interview and they're saying like what expression would you use for this and you don't know what they're talking about. It's not like an expression like an English expression like like a axiom or something like that. It's just refers to a line of code essentially. Um, some expressions are arithmetic expressions, meaning that they're math. A lot of math or a lot of coding is doing math. So a lot of expressions are doing math in code. So some other stuff that we can do, basic arithmetic, 1 minus 1, and it'll tell us 0. It'll give us the right answer. 2 times 5 is 10. 12 divided by 4. So it has like those basic operators. There's a lot of other mathematical operators that we can access, but the basic ones that we have are plus, minus, multiply, and divide. And we'll kind of go over that. We are going to be using a lot of math, but we're not going to be using really complicated, crazy math. And one of the things that's actually cool about code, a lot of students when they first see code, they're like, oh, there's all this math, and you might not really like math or have great experiences with math. But the thing that I actually think is really cool about code is if you get to a certain point, to start, you kind of have to do a little bit of math. But what you're really trying to do is get to the point where the code is doing the math for you, and you're just telling the code what math you want it to do. So we will get to that point in like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. But just keep that in mind. There is going to be a lot of numbers and math at the very beginning, but as we get better at it, we'll be getting the code to do the math for us. So that'll be good. Um, so we can also group statements together, and this will be important pretty soon. So for example, if I say 2 plus 2 times 5. That's going to give me 12. And it may not look like it should give me 12 because 2 plus 2 is 4, and 4 times 5 is 20. But it gives me that because of the way that math operations are grouped. You might remember this from algebra, or maybe not. But if you remember algebra, you know that multiplication is done first. So 2 times 5 is done first, and that gives us 10. And then we add 2, and that's what gives us 12. So if we want to add 2 first, we need to use parentheses to group. So the parentheses are just like the little curly brackets that are, or the little round brackets on the 9 and the 0 keys on the keyboard. So I do that's called an open parentheses, and we'll use we'll use a lot of parentheses in code. So this is a good thing to practice right now. So I'm going to do parentheses, open parentheses, 2 plus 2, and then close parentheses. That creates like a little group. And so it's going to add 2 and 2 together first, and then I'm going to multiply that by 5. And so that's how I get 20. So that's how I get, I get a different uh, arithmetic there. Sorry, I don't know if my microphone, as I mentioned, I just got this thing because I'm teaching 2 classes back to back, and so my Bluetooth headset will run out of batteries. So I'm still getting used to this like little like mic thing. So sorry if I keep going too loud. Okay. Another thing that you're going to see a lot as you're writing code are errors. And I'll show you what an error looks like. If I am going to do 2 plus 2, but I forgot the plus sign, and I hit enter, I'm going to get a little red message. And usually in JavaScript, it'll tell me what the problem is, but it's usually hard to understand at first. It's not going to tell you exactly what you did wrong because it doesn't really know. And we'll talk a lot more about this in a future class, but what this is saying is unexpected number. It's kind of confusing, but essentially what it's saying is that I had this 2 here, and then I have a space, which means that in code, the space means something else is about to happen. Like I'm done with the number and I'm about to do something else. And so what it's telling me is that you started with this number, but then you just wrote another number, and that's not a valid expression. So that's why I got an error. So it can be confusing at first reading these error messages, but you'll get used to them as you see them. Now for me, it's like I see it and I immediately know what it is because I've seen it a million times. You'll see tons and tons of errors, and they're kind of annoying, but you just get used to it. It's just part of programming. Okay, we're getting close to 5:40, so we'll do a couple more things, and then we might break for today. Um, so yeah, so what I'm saying here, notice that the error isn't very specific. It didn't say you forgot to add a plus sign. JavaScript usually doesn't know exactly what we meant to do, but it knows what we did wrong, essentially. And so an expression that is not written in a way that it expects, it'll try to do its best to tell us what we did wrong, but it doesn't really know what we were trying to do. So that's why the error messages are not always perfect. Okay, so we're going to go over a few different types of expressions. How many slides is left? Okay, yeah, we're not going to get through all that. So let's just do this one, and then we will stop for today. So Boolean expressions, this is another thing. So we have numbers like 1 plus 2 gives us 3. In JavaScript, we also have these things called Booleans, and we're going to use these a ton. They essentially just are true or false. So if I write true, that's something that's true. If I write false, that's something that's false. Basically, we'll talk about this more, but essentially all programming comes down to true and false. It's, binary essentially. And that's how computers work. So, if you think of a switch, like if I have a light, I can turn the switch on or off. If I have a dimmer, I can go in between, but if I have a regular light, it's either on or off. There's no in between. And that's actually how pretty much the whole computer works, is it has these little chips. You might have heard in the news about like the US like reinvest putting more investment into silicon chips. They're honestly like the most important things in technology and sort of like the world right now, because they're very, very hard to make and only some people are good at making them, and they're really worth a lot of money. They're what make our phones and our computers run and all that stuff. Anyway, it's basically just like a little thing with a million billion switches in it, and they're all going on and off really fast all the time. And if you do stuff that's complicated enough, then you get video and audio and text and all the other things that we normally see on a computer. Um, and so, anyway, the main point is that Boolean expressions are really important to programming, because our computer really thinks of everything in these binaries. Things are either true or false, and we're kind of making decisions based on that. So yeah, we'll see that in a couple weeks. Um, Actually, yeah, this is too much to go into for the next few minutes. So we'll stop here and we'll pick this up on Wednesday. We'll finish this out and then we'll do the open lab, and we should be in a good place after that. But yeah, we have a few minutes left. I want to just make sure if anybody has questions that we can get to them. So I'll finish this intro lecture on Wednesday.